Bound by Fate. Part 1. When Worlds Collide. The pre-dawn air in Nairobi carried the scent of rain and red earth. Smells Imani Wanjiru had known all her 25 years. She stood in the doorway of the small house that had sheltered her family through every storm, watching her mother wrap leftovers she'd never eat into foil packets. "Mama, I'm only going to Korea, not the moon." Imani tried to smile, but her voice wavered. Her mother's hands stilled. "The moon might be closer, my daughter. At least I could see it from here." In the bedroom they'd shared since childhood, Immani sat cross-legged on Imani's bed, folding clothes with theatrical sighs. At 22, her sister still believed the world was full of fairy tales waiting to happen. She held up one of Imani's t-shirts, the one with a faded image of a Korean actor. "I can't believe you're really going." "My sister, the housekeeper to the rich and possibly handsome." Immani waggled her eyebrows. "It's not a drama, Aki." But Imani's protest was weak. How many nights had she fallen asleep to the glow of her phone, watching beautiful men in perfectly tailored suits confess their love in the rain? Not yet. Immani's grin faded as she noticed the envelope on Imani's desk. Another rejection letter from a publisher. Its formal language just a polite way of saying not good enough. "But your real story is just beginning." Imani's phone buzzed. The housekeeping agency confirming her flight details. The salary they'd offered was obscene by Kenyan standards. Enough to cover her father's medication, her brother's school fees, and maybe, just maybe, give her the time to write the novel that would finally get accepted. 1 year, she whispered to herself. Just 1 year and everything changes. She had no idea how right she was. Across the world, in a palace where history breathed through every stone, Kim Jin-pyong stood before a portrait that haunted his dreams. Lady Yoon's painted eyes seemed to follow him, accusatory even in death. She'd been 26 when the political assassins found her. Collateral damage in a war that had nothing to do with love and everything to do with power. He'd refused to step down from his position as king, believing his duty to the throne superseded everything. He'd been wrong. 3 years had passed, but guilt was a patient companion. It waited in empty corridors, sat beside him at state dinners, and whispered in the moments before sleep finally claimed him. "Your Majesty." Minister Hong's voice cut through the silence. "The car is ready." Jin-pyong was 33 years old but acts ancient. He turned from the portrait, his face settling into the mask he wore for the world. Cold, untouchable, perfectly controlled. "The hospital confirmed the procedure?" His voice was flat. "Yes. The surrogate will be inseminated today. By the time you return from Singapore it will be done." Hong hesitated. "Sir, are you certain about this path? There are other ways to secure an heir." "I will not marry again." The words came out sharp as glass. "This is the only way." Hong bowed, knowing when to retreat. As Jin-pyong walked through the palace's ancient corridors, servants scattered like startled birds. They feared him, not because he was cruel but because he was a void, a black hole of emotion that swallowed warmth and gave nothing back. He told himself he preferred it this way. Incheon International Airport was chaos wrapped in efficiency. Immani emerged from the arrivals gate feeling like she'd been folded, crushed, and reassembled. 14 hours in economy had taught her that airplanes were torture devices disguised as transportation. Everything was in Korean. The signs, the announcements, the rapid-fire conversations flowing around her like a river she couldn't cross. She clutched her phone with the housekeeping agency's address, trying to make sense of the transportation options. A group of teenagers walked past, openly staring. One whispered to her friend and they both giggled. Imani's shoulders tensed. She'd researched Korea's complicated relationship with blackness, had prepared herself for curiosity, for othering. But preparation and experience were different countries. "You chose this," she reminded herself, gripping her suitcase handle tighter. "For Mama. For the family. For the dream." She started toward the exit, her suitcases broken while making it veer left with every step. She was fighting with it, frustrated and exhausted, when the crowd ahead suddenly parted like a sea. Men in black suits moved through the terminal with military precision. At their center walked a man who seemed to carry winter with him. He wore a perfectly tailored suit with subtle traditional elements. The collar just slightly higher, the fabric a deep charcoal that seemed to absorb light. Imani looked up just as they passed. Their eyes met for a fraction of a heartbeat. His eyes were dark, fathomless, and utterly empty. Handsome in the way of her dramas, but wrong, like a painting of a man rather than an actual human being. There was no warmth there, no recognition of her as anything more than an obstacle in his path. Then he was gone, swallowed by the private terminal, and Imani was left with the strange feeling that she'd just seen a ghost. She shook it off. Korea was full of rich, handsome men. That's what the dramas had taught her. This one was probably some CEO or actor. She'd never see him again. The universe, it seemed, had a twisted sense of humor. In the private terminal, Jin Pyong felt Minister Hong's eyes on him as they waited to board. Something wrong, sir? Jin Pyong realized he'd paused, was looking back toward the main terminal. No. Nothing. But that wasn't quite true. For a moment, when his eyes had met those of the African woman struggling with her suitcase, he'd felt something. A flicker. A spark in the dead space where his heart used to be. Then it was gone and he was himself again. Empty, dutiful, alone. The Singapore summit will take 3 days, Hong was saying. The trade negotiations are delicate. The Prime Minister. I know. Jin Pyong's voice was distant. By the time we return, the future will be secured. A child. An heir. A continuation of a bloodline that stretched back centuries. That's all that mattered. That's all that could matter when you'd already lost everything that made life worth living. As the private jet lifted into the sky, Jin Pyong stared out at Seoul shrinking below. Somewhere in that sprawling city, in a hospital he'd never visited, his genetic material was being prepared for transfer into a woman he'd never met. Clinical. Efficient. Emotionless. Exactly how he preferred everything in his life. The Kim estate, not Jin Pyong's palace, but the home of the wealthy family Immani would serve, sat in Gangnam like a traditional jewel in a modern setting. Mrs. Park, the head of household, was a woman who could convey disapproval with the angle of her chin. You are late. Her Korean was clipped, formal. I'm sorry, the traffic. Imani's Korean was textbook perfect but obviously foreign. We speak Korean in this house. Only Korean. You will learn quickly or you will leave quickly. Understood. Imani nodded, her pride stinging. She wanted to say she had a university degree, that she was an author, or trying to be, that she was more than just a housekeeper. But the weight of her family's needs kept her silent. The room they gave her was small but clean, tucked in the servants' quarters. After Mrs. Park left, Imani sat on the narrow bed and finally let herself feel the weight of it all. She was alone in a country where she couldn't speak the language fluently, where her skin made her a spectacle, where her dreams felt very far away. Her phone buzzed. Immani texting. Asterisk, have you met him yet? Your Korean prince. Asterisk. Imani smiled despite herself. Asterisk, girl, I've met mops and expectations I'm already failing. This isn't a drama. Asterisk. Yet Immani replied. The good ones always start rough. If only that were true. Seoul General Hospital's fertility wing existed in a hushed world of whispered hopes and expensive miracles. Dr. Kong had performed thousands of procedures, but this one made his hands tremble. The king's child. The continuation of royal bloodline. The weight of history in a petri dish. The surrogate is ready, he asked Nurse Choi. Yes, doctor. In the VIP suite. But Nurse Choi's voice was distracted, her eyes red-rimmed. Her phone kept buzzing in her pocket, her husband texting details about the divorce he wanted, the affair he'd been hiding, the life he was destroying with each message. Prepare the transfer room. I'll review the files once more. As Dr. Kong walked away, Nurse Choi stared at the files on her desk. Her vision blurred with tears she refused to shed at work. 2 files. Asterisk Wandering Room 304. Treatment. 4 fluids for flight sickness. Asterisk. Asterisk Moon Imani IP Suite 12. Procedure. Gestational surrogate insemination. Asterisk. Her phone buzzed again. Another message from her husband. Another crack in the life she thought she'd built. She grabbed a file, didn't notice which one, and headed to prep the procedure room. Sometimes, the worst mistakes are born from the smallest moments of human pain. 1 week bled into another. Imani threw herself into work with a ferocity that surprised even Mrs. Park. She learned the family's routines, picked up Korean faster than anyone expected, and carved out stolen moments to write. But her body was betraying her. The exhaustion wouldn't lift. She'd wake up feeling like she'd been drained of color. The smell of certain foods made her stomach revolt. And there was a tenderness in her breasts that felt wrong, foreign. "You look terrible," said Jisoo, another housekeeper who'd warmed to Imani faster than the others. "You should see a doctor." "I'm fine. Just adjusting." But she wasn't fine. And when she nearly fainted while cleaning the upstairs bathroom, Mrs. Park's disapproval finally cracked into something resembling concern. "Go to the hospital. No. And don't come back until you're well enough to work properly." Seoul General Hospital looked different in daylight, less intimidating. Imani filled out paperwork in halting Korean, her hand cramping around the pen. Name, Imani Wanjiru. Age 25. Reason for visit, extreme fatigue, nausea, dizziness. She sat in the waiting room watching Korean families come and go, feeling very far from home. Wanjiru SSI. A nurse called her name, mangling the pronunciation. The examination room was cold. The doctor was efficient, clinical. He ordered blood work, talked about jet lag and adjustment periods, and set her up with N4 for fluids and vitamins. "This will help," he said. "Rest for 2 hours, then you can go home." Imani nodded, already drifting into exhausted sleep as the 4 dripped into her veins. She didn't see the room number, 304. Didn't see the private wing designation that shouldn't have been on her charts. Didn't see Nurse Choi's face, drawn and distracted as she prepared the equipment for what she thought was a routine vitamin 4. In VIP Suite 12, Imani checked her watch for the 15th time. The procedure was supposed to start an hour ago. She was being paid an extraordinary amount of money to carry the king's child, enough to change her entire life. The least they could do was be punctual. She pressed the call button again. "Excuse me? When will Dr. Kong be ready?" "Soon," came the harried response. "Please wait." Dr. Kong entered room 304 with the careful precision that had made him the most sought-after fertility specialist in Seoul. The woman on the bed was sedated, exactly as planned. He didn't look at her face. Surrogates were meant to be anonymous, vessels for hope, not individuals. Nurse Choi assisted with practice deficiency, though her hands shook slightly. The procedure took 17 minutes. "Complete," Dr. Kong announced. "Keep her under observation for 2 hours. Remind her of the post-care instructions. No strenuous activity for 48 hours. Watch for any unusual symptoms. Return in 2 weeks for confirmation." "Yes, doctor." As Dr. Kong left, Nurse Choi looked down at the chart in her hands. Something niggled at the back of her mind, a sense that something was wrong. But her phone buzzed again and the thought shattered like glass. Imani woke slowly, groggily. The room spun lazily. A nurse, not Nurse Choi, someone else, was checking her vitals. "How do you feel?" "Tired," Imani mumbled in Korean. "Did the 4 help?" "Yes." "Rest another hour, then you can leave. Here are your post-care instructions." The nurse handed her papers covered in Korean medical terminology that Imani couldn't fully parse through the medication fog. Something about taking it easy. Something about returning for a follow-up. Standard stuff, she figured. She left the hospital feeling marginally better, the paperwork stuffed in her bag forgotten. 2 hours later, Imani's patience snapped. "This is unacceptable. I've been waiting for 3 hours." The VIP suite erupted into chaos. Staff rushed. Dr. Kong was paged. When he arrived and saw Imani, very much not pregnant, very much furious, his face drained of blood. "But I performed the procedure." "What procedure?" "I've been sitting in this room untouched." The administrator rushed in. "Dr. Kong, what's happening?" "I completed the insemination 2 hours ago in room 304. He stopped. Looked at Nurse Choi. "Show me the file." "The file you gave me." Nurse Choi's hands shook as she retrieved it from the prep room. Asterisk wondering room 304. Treatment. 4 fluids for flight sickness. Asterisk. The world stopped. Oh God, Nurse Choi whispered. Oh God, what have I done? Dr. Kong grabbed both files, comparing them. The names. The mix-up. The catastrophic, life-destroying, career-ending mistake. Find her, he said, his voice barely controlled. Find her now. The hospital administrator looked at Imani Wanjiru's file. Saw the incomplete phone number. The barely legible address. The stamp marking her as a foreign national new to the country. Sir, there's no way to reach her. The contact information is incomplete. Then find another way. Do you understand what we've done? Whose child she's carrying? In the chaos, no one noticed Nurse Choi collapse into a chair, her phone finally silent in her pocket, her life imploding in real time. Across the city, in a palace that felt more like a museum than a home, Jin Pyong stood at a window overlooking Seoul's glittering skyline. Minister Hong entered with a bottle of aged whiskey and 2 glasses, their ritual after every international trip. The Singapore negotiations went well, Hong said, pouring. The trade deal will be signed within the month. Jin Pyong accepted the glass but didn't drink. And the hospital? The procedure was successful. The surrogate is confirmed pregnant. Congratulations, Your Majesty. In 9 months you'll have your heir. Jin Pyong nodded, feeling nothing. No joy. No anticipation. Just the grim satisfaction of duty fulfilled. The child will be raised in tradition, he said. Taught everything I was taught. Prepared for the burden of this bloodline. Of course. Hong hesitated. And the mother? Imani has signed all the agreements. She understands she'll have no claim after birth. Good. Jin Pyong walked to the portrait of Lady Yoon. In the dim light her smile seemed sad. I'm sorry, he thought as he did every night. Asterisk, I'm sorry I chose duty over you. I'm sorry my choice killed you. I'm sorry I'm bringing another life into this prison. Asterisk. But sorrow changed nothing. Duty remained. The throne required an heir. And Jin Pyong had learned the hard way that love was a luxury kings couldn't afford. He drained his glass and prepared for another sleepless night. Imani's body declared war on her exactly 12 days after the hospital visit. She woke up and barely made it to the bathroom before vomiting. The smell of Mrs. Park's breakfast, usually appealing, made her stomach heave. Her breasts were so tender she could barely wear a bra. And the exhaustion. God, the exhaustion felt like drowning. Are you sick again? Jisoo asked, concerned. I don't know. Maybe I caught something at the hospital. But deep down in a place Imani didn't want to look, a terrible suspicion was growing. It was impossible. Completely impossible. She was a virgin, had been since the incident 3 years ago with Jacob, the man who'd said he loved her, who'd tried to force what she wasn't ready to give, who'd left her with scars that weren't visible but never healed. After Jacob she'd sworn off men. After Jacob she'd poured everything into her writing, into her dreams of escape. She couldn't be pregnant. It violated the laws of biology and every choice she'd made. But her body didn't care about logic. In her tiny room with shaking hands, Imani unwrapped the pregnancy test she'd bought from a convenience store, hiding it like contraband. The clerk had looked at her with barely concealed judgment. A foreign woman alone buying a pregnancy test. 2 minutes felt like 2 years. 1 line meant freedom. 2 lines meant 2 lines. The test clattered to the floor. Imani's phone slipped from numb fingers. Her vision tunneled, grayed at the edges. Asterisk impossible. 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 Asterisk. She grabbed her phone, hands shaking so badly she could barely type. She searched symptoms in English. Pregnant but virgin possible? The results talked about medical miracles, about rare cases, about the hospital. Memory slammed into her like a fist. The private room. The paperwork she couldn't fully read. The way the nurse had acted like she expected Imani to know something she didn't. No, she whispered. No, 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 no. She grabbed her bag, barely remembered to tell Mrs. Park she was sick, and ran. Seoul General Hospital's fertility wing looked different when you were terrified. Imani burst through the doors like a hurricane, the positive pregnancy test clutched in her hand like evidence of a crime. I need to see a doctor. Now. The receptionist took one look at her face and picked up the phone. Within minutes, Imani was ushered into a private office. Dr. Kong sat behind a massive desk, his face gray with dread. The hospital administrator stood beside him, practically vibrating with anxiety. Ms. Wanjiru, Dr. Kong began. Please sit. I don't want to sit. I want you to tell me what you did to me. She slammed the pregnancy test onto his desk. This says I'm pregnant. But that's impossible. I'm a virgin. So you tell me, doctor, how is this possible? The silence was damning. Dr. Kang's shoulders sagged. Ms. Wanjiru, there was a mistake. A terrible, inexcusable mistake. The room spun. Imani gripped the desk to stay upright. What kind of mistake? When you came in for 4 fluids, there was a mix-up with the files. Another patient, a woman with a similar name, was here for a different procedure. A fertility procedure. His voice cracked. You were inseminated with donor material that was intended for her. Imani couldn't breathe. Couldn't think. The words were English but they made no sense. You put someone else's inside me? Without my consent. Without my knowledge. It was an accident. An accident? Her voice shattered into screaming. You violated me. You did to me what? Jacob's face flashed through her mind. The weight of him. The way he'd held her down. The way her no hadn't mattered. This is my body. The administrator stepped forward, already in damage control mode. Ms. Wanjiru, we understand this is shocking. We're prepared to offer you substantial compensation. We can arrange for a termination immediately. Private, discreet. I can't. The words came out broken, barely audible. Both men froze. What? Dr. Kong asked. Imani's eyes filled with tears. I have Asherman's syndrome. From a procedure I had after an assault 3 years ago. My doctor in Kenya said if I ever terminated a pregnancy, scar tissue would form. I'd never be able to have children. Ever. The weight of it crashed down on all of them. So you've trapped me, Imani whispered. You violated me and now you've trapped me. Dr. Kong looked like he might be sick. The father. Ms. Wanjiru, the biological father is. This is complicated. He's a very important man. Very powerful. I don't care if he's the president. This is my body. My life. He's not the president, the administrator said carefully. He's more than that. His Majesty King Kim Jin Pyong. The floor dropped away. Imani had researched Korean culture obsessively before coming. She knew about the royal family, descendants of the Joseon dynasty stripped of political power but still revered, still important, still royalty. A king, she repeated numbly. You put a king's baby inside me. We need to contact him immediately, the administrator said. This situation requires discretion. Discretion. Imani laughed, a broken sound. You mean you want to cover this up? Make me disappear. We want to find a solution that works for everyone. Everyone except me, you mean? I'm a foreign woman. A black woman. Carrying the child of Korean royalty. You want me gone. The truth of it hung in the air, ugly and undeniable. Dr. Kong stood. Ms. Wanjiru, please. Give us time to contact His Majesty. Stay here where you're safe. Safe. Imani backed toward the door. I'm not safe anywhere. Not from you. Not from him. Not from. Please. The administrator blocked her path. This isn't just about you anymore. That child you're carrying is the heir to the oldest royal line in Korea. There are implications. Security concerns. You can't just leave. Watch me. But even as she said it, Imani knew she was lying. Where would she go? Back to the Kim estate where she was just a housekeeper. To the airport when she barely had money for next month's phone bill. Home to Kenya, where the shame of this would destroy her family. She was trapped. Pregnant with a stranger's child, violated by a system that saw her as disposable, alone in a country that had never been home. Contact him, she finally said, her voice dead. Contact your king. But you tell him this, I'm not his surrogate. I'm not his incubator. I'm a person and he's going to have to look me in the eye and face what was done to me. Dr. Kong nodded, already reaching for his phone. As Immani sank into a chair, hand instinctively covering her stomach, she thought of all the K-dramas she'd watched. All the handsome, noble men who'd swept desperate women off their feet. Reality, it seemed, was far crueler than fiction. Minister Hong's phone rang during a state council meeting. He glanced at the screen, Seoul General Hospital marked urgent, and excused himself immediately. Jin Pyong noticed. They'd been friends too long for Hong to hide his tells. The meeting dragged on another 30 minutes. By the time they returned to the private offices, Hong's face was ashen. Tell me, Jin Pyong commanded. The hospital, there was an error. A significant error. Hong poured them both whiskey with shaking hands. The surrogate, Moon Immani, was never inseminated. Jin Pyong's expression didn't change, but his knuckles whitened around his glass. Explain. There was a mix-up. Another patient with a similar name. The procedure was performed on the wrong woman. Hong drained his glass. She's pregnant, Your Majesty. With your child. Then arrange the termination and compensation. Pay whatever. She can't terminate. Medical condition. She'd become permanently infertile. Jin Pyong stood very still. Who is she? A Kenyan national. 25 years old. Working as a housekeeper. She's been in Korea for 3 weeks. Hong paused. Your Majesty, she's black. The implications crashed down like a building collapse. A foreign woman. A black woman. Pregnant with the heir to the Korean throne. The scandal would be nuclear. Conservative factions would revolt. The media would feast. And the child? Where is she? Still at the hospital. She's demanding to speak with you. Something in Jin Pyong's chest tightened. Demanding. Not begging, not hiding. Demanding. She wants money? He asked. I don't think so, sir. From what Dr. Kong said, she wants accountability. Jin Pyong almost laughed. Accountability. As if his entire life wasn't built on answering for choices he'd never truly made. Bring her to the palace. Tonight. Your Majesty, perhaps we should meet on neutral ground. No. If she's carrying my child, she enters my world. Let her see what she's bound to. Let her understand the weight of this. Hong bowed, already pulling out his phone. Jin Pyong returned to the window, staring out at Seoul. A city of millions, and somehow, impossibly, his life had collided with a woman he'd passed in an airport. A woman whose face he could barely remember. Just an impression of defiance, of foreignness, of someone utterly outside his controlled world. Your Majesty? Hong's voice was careful. What are you thinking? That the universe has a vicious sense of humor. Jin Pyong turned from the window. Prepare the east wing. If she's carrying the heir, she stays under my protection. Sir, keeping her at the palace, the staff will talk. The security risks. Are you questioning me? I'm worried about you. Hong's formal mask slipped, showing the friend beneath. Jin Pyong, this woman could destroy everything. Your reputation, the family line, your peace. My peace was destroyed 3 years ago. Jin Pyong's voice was flat. This is duty. Nothing more. The child must be protected. She stays. Hong knew when he'd lost. I'll make the arrangements. As he left, Jin Pyong poured another drink and returned to Lady Yoon's portrait. You'd find this funny, he told her. You always said I was too rigid, too controlled. That life would find a way to crack my foundation. He raised his glass in a bitter toast. Congratulations. You were right. The painted eyes stared back, forever young, forever accusing. Jin Pyong drained his glass and prepared to meet the woman who'd just become the most dangerous person in his carefully ordered world. Night fell over Seoul like a curtain. Immani sat in the hospital's private wing, numb with shock, when 2 men in suits entered the room. Ms. Wanjiru, please come with us. Where? His Majesty has requested your presence. Requested. as if she had a choice. The car was black, expensive, and utterly silent. Immani sat in the back watching Seoul blur past, wondering if this was how prisoners felt on their way to sentencing. The palace appeared like something from a dream, or a nightmare. Traditional architecture blended with modern security. Guards everywhere. Cameras. The weight of history in every stone. They led her through corridors that seemed designed to make visitors feel small. Painted screens. Jade carvings. Artifacts worth more than her family would earn in 10 lifetimes. Finally, massive doors opened to a receiving hall that took her breath away. And at the far end, silhouetted against floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city, stood a man she recognized. The man from the airport. The ghost with empty eyes. King. As she walked forward, their eyes met, and this time recognition flared in both. Jin Pyong's carefully controlled expression cracked, just for a moment. The woman from the airport. The one who'd looked at me like I was human. You, he said. You, Imani echoed, her voice shaking with fury and fear. They stared at each other across the vast room. Two people whose lives had just become impossibly, irrevocably tangled. You're the one. Imani's voice rose. You're the father of this thing inside me? Jin Pyong flinched at thing, but his voice remained controlled. This is an unfortunate situation. But understand, that child you carry is the heir to the oldest royal line in Korea. There are protocols. Expectations. I don't care about your protocols. Imani strode forward, closing the distance between them. You don't own me. You don't own this. She touched her stomach, the gesture protective despite her anger. Just because some hospital made a mistake. Jin Pyong's jaw tightened. Something flickered in his eyes at her protective gesture. Within these borders, I own everything. Then you have a problem. Because I'm not from here. The air between them crackled with tension. Minister Hong stepped forward, trying to defuse the situation. Ms. Wanjiru, perhaps we should discuss this calmly. Discuss what? How you're going to make me disappear. How much money it'll take to shut me up. I've already been told I can't terminate. So what's your plan? Lock me up for 9 months and then take the baby? Yes, Jin Pyong said bluntly. The honesty of it knocked the air from her lungs. At least you're direct. I don't believe in wasting words. Jin Pyong moved closer and Imani forced herself not to step back. You'll stay here. In the palace. You'll have your own quarters, complete privacy, the best medical care in the country. Anything you need. But you will not leave. So I'm a prisoner. You're under my protection. Those are the same thing. Not in my world. Jin Pyong's voice dropped, became almost gentle. No, that couldn't be right. Ms. Wanjiru, do you understand what will happen if this becomes public? You're a foreign woman carrying the heir to the throne. There are factions in this country who would see you as a threat, a scandal, or worse. The hospital is desperate to cover this up. They might. Might what? Kill me. Imani's laugh was brittle. At least be honest about what you mean. Jin Pyong's expression shifted, something like respect flickering across his face. You're more perceptive than I expected. And you're exactly as cold as you look. A muscle in his jaw twitched. You know nothing about me. I know you're willing to imprison a woman to get what you want. That's enough. Minister Hong cleared his throat. Perhaps we should discuss arrangements. What arrangements? Imani rounded on him. I came here to work as a housekeeper. To send money home to my family. To maybe write a book that someone would actually read. I didn't ask for this. I didn't consent to this. And now you want me to just, what? Accept it? Be grateful for my gilded cage. I understand your anger, Jin Pyong began. You understand nothing. Tears streamed down Imani's face now, all her defenses crumbling. 3 years ago, a man I trusted tried to force himself on me. I fought him off, but barely. After that, I had complications. Medical issues. That's why I can't terminate now, because my body is already damaged from fighting off one violation. And now you've all done it again. You've put something inside me without my consent, and you're telling me I have no choice but to carry it. The room went silent. Jin Pyong's face had gone pale. I didn't know, he said quietly. About your past. I'm sorry. Your apology changes nothing. No. It doesn't. He turned away, hands clenched behind his back. But neither does your anger. We're bound together now whether we like it or not. You're carrying my child. The heir to my family line. That's reality. And after... Imani's voice cracked. After 9 months of this prison sentence? What happens to me then? Jin Pyong was silent for a long moment. We'll discuss that when the time comes. That's not good enough. Suddenly the room tilted. Imani's vision grayed at the edges. She swayed, her knees buckling. Jin Pyong moved with surprising speed, catching her arm before she could fall. The touch sent electricity through them both, their first real physical contact. His hand was warm, strong, and for a moment, Imani felt anchored. Then she remembered who he was, what he represented, and jerked away. Don't touch me. The words hit him like a slap. His hand dropped, but something flickered across his face. Hurt, quickly masked. You're unwell. Minister Hong, get the doctor. Now. I don't need a doctor. I need to go home. I need to call my sister. But even as she protested, her body betrayed her. Exhaustion pulled at her like a riptide. You're in no condition to argue. Jin Pyong's voice softened just barely. Please. Sit down before you collapse. It was the please that undid her. The crack in his armor. The hint that beneath the ice something human might still live. She let them guide her to an ornate chair. Servants materialized from nowhere. One with water, another with a cushion, all of them avoiding eye contact. They're afraid of you, Imani said, watching them scatter. Yes. Why? Jin Pyong looked at her, really looked at her for the first time. Because fear is simpler than respect. Easier to maintain than love. Before she could respond, a doctor rushed in. Not Dr. Kong, but an older woman with kind eyes. Your Majesty. She bowed, then turned to Imani. I'm Dr. Yoon. May I examine you? Imani wanted to refuse, but her body was screaming. She nodded. As Dr. Yoon checked her vitals, Jin Pyong stood by the window, his back to them. But Imani could see his reflection in the glass. The tension in his shoulders, the way his hand kept clenching and unclenching. He was affected by this. Beneath the control, beneath the ice, he was drowning too. Her blood pressure is low, Dr. Yoon announced. She's dehydrated and malnourished. When did you last eat? Imani tried to remember. This morning? Maybe yesterday morning. I don't. She needs rest. Proper nutrition. And peace. Dr. Yoon looked pointedly at Jin Pyong. Stress is dangerous for the baby. Then she'll have everything she needs to be stress-free, Jin Pyong said, still facing the window. Minister Hong, prepare the East Wing immediately. Full staff. Whatever she requires. Sir, the staff will ask questions. Tell them she's a guest under my personal protection. Anyone who questions further will be dismissed. His voice turned to steel. And anyone who speaks of her presence to anyone outside these walls will face charges of treason. The threat hung in the air, heavy and real. Dr. Yoon helped Imani stand. Come, let me show you to your rooms. You need to rest. As they moved toward the door, Imani looked back at Jin Pyong. He was still facing the window, still rigid, still alone. This isn't over, she said. He didn't turn. I know. The east wing of the palace was more beautiful than anything Imani had ever seen. Traditional sliding doors opened to rooms with heated floors, furniture that looked like museum pieces, and windows overlooking gardens that could have been paintings. This is where you'll stay, Dr. Yoon said gently. The bedroom, a study, a private bathroom. If you need anything, there's a bell pull by the bed. Imani stood in the center of the bedroom, feeling like an imposter. I don't belong here. Perhaps. But you're here nonetheless. Dr. Yoon prepared to leave, then paused. His Majesty, he's not what people think. What do you mean? He's not cruel. He's broken. There's a difference. Dr. Yoon smiled sadly. 3 years ago he was different. Before Lady Yoon died. Like your name. My niece. The pain in her voice was fresh. She was his betrothed. His soulmate if you believe in such things. She was killed because of his political decisions. He's never forgiven himself. Imani's anger flickered, complicated by this new information. That doesn't excuse. I'm not asking you to excuse anything. Only to understand that you're not the only one trapped in an impossible situation. Dr. Yoon touched her shoulder gently. Rest now. I'll have food sent up. After she left, Imani finally allowed herself to break. She sank to the floor back against the silk-covered wall and called her sister. Akinyi answered on the first ring. Imani. Finally. I've been calling for hours. Aki. Imani's voice cracked. Something's happened. What? Are you okay? Did someone hurt you? Yes. No. I don't know. The whole story poured out. The hospital, the mistake, the pregnancy, the king. All of it in a rush of words and tears. Silence on the other end. Then, you're carrying a king's baby. This isn't a drama, Aki. This is a nightmare. I know. I know it is. Akinyi's voice was thick with tears. What do you want to do? I don't know. I can't terminate. I can't run. Where would I go? And he's going to keep me here. Like a prisoner. For 9 months. Then we fight. We get lawyers. With what money? Against a king? Imani laughed bitterly. I'm trapped, Aki. Completely trapped. You're the strongest person I know. You survived Jacob. You survived everything after. You'll survive this too. Will I? Imani touched her stomach where something impossibly small was growing. What if I don't want to survive this? What if I want to go home and pretend none of this happened? Then I'll be waiting. But Imani, you've always said you wanted an adventure. That you wanted your life to mean something. Akinyi paused. Maybe this is it. Not the way you planned, but this isn't an adventure. It's a violation. I know. And I'm so sorry. But you're there now. With a baby growing inside you. And from what you've said, this king, he's not evil. Just damaged. That doesn't make it okay. No. But maybe it makes it survivable. After they hung up, Imani found she couldn't cry anymore. She was empty, wrung out, floating in a strange space between despair and acceptance. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. A servant entered with a tray of food, delicate dishes that looked too beautiful to eat, tea that smelled like flowers. His Majesty asked if there's anything specific you'd like, the woman said in careful Korean. Any foods from your home? Imani blinked, surprised. He asked that. Yes, miss. He was very specific. He said you should have whatever brings you comfort. It was such a small thing. But it cracked something inside her. Chapati, she said quietly. And maybe, ugali if it's possible. I know the ingredients might be hard to find. We'll find them, miss. His Majesty has ordered that you have anything you need. After the servant left, Imani moved to the window. The palace grounds stretched out below, beautiful and vast and utterly foreign. Somewhere in this maze of tradition and history, the man whose child she carried was probably staring out his own window, feeling just as trapped as she was. What have we become to each other? He wondered. Prisoner and jailer? Mother and father? Two strangers bound by biology and bad luck? She didn't have answers. Only 9 months of questions ahead of her. Jin Pyong stood in his study, the whiskey in his hand untouched. Minister Hong had left an hour ago, still arguing about security risks and scandal control. But Jin Pyong barely heard him. He kept seeing her face. The terror mixed with fury. The way she touched her stomach. Protective, instinctive, already a mother despite her anger. The tears when she'd spoken about her past assault. You've violated me, she'd said. And she was right. He hadn't wielded the syringe, hadn't made the mistake, but it happened in his name for his heir, because of his decision to use a surrogate rather than face the terrifying prospect of loving someone again. I'm sorry, he told her. And he'd meant it. But sorry was just a word, powerless against the reality of what had been done. A knock at the door. Enter. Dr. Yoon, his almost aunt, his dead love's family, one of the few people who still looked at him like he was human, stepped inside. She's resting, Dr. Yoon reported. But Jin Pyong, that girl has been through hell. The assault she mentioned. I heard. And you still plan to keep her here? To imprison her? To protect her? But his voice lacked conviction. From whom? Or from what? Dr. Yoon moved closer. I see my niece's portrait still haunts you. But Jin Pyong, you can't punish every woman for not being her. And you can't protect everyone by locking them away. Yoon died because of choices made in the shadows. Don't make the same mistakes. This is different. How? You're trapping this girl in a palace just like you were trapped by duty. You're creating another cage just with better furniture. Dr. Yoon's voice gentled. She asked for Kenyan food. Do you know what that means? That she's homesick. That she's human. That despite everything she's trying to survive. And you asked what she needed. That's more humanity than you've shown in 3 years. Dr. Yoon touched his shoulder. Don't lose it now. Don't let this girl become another ghost in these halls. After she left, Jin Pyong returned to Lady Yoon's portrait. But for the first time in 3 years her face wasn't the only one he saw. Dark skin. Defiant eyes. Tears on brown cheeks. A woman whose name he barely knew but whose life was now tangled with his in the most intimate way possible. Imani Wanjiru. He said it aloud, testing the syllables. Fern. Musical. Nothing like the traditional Korean names that echoed through palace halls. A child with Korean royal blood and Kenyan features. A heir who would look like no one in the family portraits. A future he couldn't control or predict. The thought should have terrified him. Instead he felt something he hadn't experienced in years. A spark of curiosity. A crack in the ice. Who are you, Imani Wanjiru? He wondered. And what will we become to each other before this is over? The palace settled into silence around him, holding its breath, waiting to see if its king would choose duty or humanity. Or if perhaps he might finally learn they could be the same thing. Midnight crept across Seoul like a secret. In the East Wing, Immani lay in a bed too soft, in a room too beautiful, in a situation too impossible. Her hand rested on her stomach, still flat, still unchanged, but carrying a future that terrified her. I don't know what to do, she whispered to the child that was barely more than a cluster of cells. I don't know how to be your mother. I don't even know if I want to be. But even as she said it, her hand stayed protective, cradling. The door to her room was unlocked, she checked. She could leave if she wanted. Walk out of the palace, catch a cab to the airport, fly home to Kenya. But Dr. Kang's words echoed. His Majesty has ordered that you have anything you need. Not demanded. Not commanded. Ordered, yes, but with a concern that felt almost human. She pulled out her notebook, the one she'd brought from Kenya, filled with story ideas and half-finished scenes. Her fingers found a blank page. Chapter 1. A woman out of place. The words flowed, unexpected and urgent. Not the romance she'd planned to write. Not the escape fantasy she'd imagined. But something rawer, truer. A story about a woman violated by circumstance. A king trapped by duty. And the impossible thread connecting them. She wrote until her eyes burned, until the words became prophecy, until the future felt slightly less terrifying because at least she could control the narrative on the page, even if she couldn't control her life. When she finally slept, she dreamed of airports and crossed paths, of eyes meeting across impossible distances, of two worlds colliding in slow motion. And in another wing of the same vast palace, Jin Pyong stood at his window, sleepless, staring at the quarters where a stranger carried his future. For the first time in 3 years he wasn't thinking about the past. He was terrified of what came next. The palace held 2 prisoners that night, one locked by walls, one by guilt. Both wondering if 9 months was enough time to learn how to be human again. Or if some cages were too strong to escape no matter how hard you fought. End of part 1. In the collision of 2 worlds, nothing remains unchanged. Not duty. Not fear. And certainly not 2 hearts that have forgotten how to feel. To be continued.